stampingly, Bruce and I go in the mall, and all of a sudden, we were surrounded by people called blockers. Now, I had never heard of blockers before except in football. And these were people, young people, men, women, young men and young women, and their job was to stop people from signing the petition. So if you're standing there with some nice lady and she's trying to sign it, they come up and give her one of these, okay? Or they say, where's your car? And they follow her to the car. And they do stop. This is, you know, this harkens back to some early period in the labor movement as far as I was concerned, and I had never seen anything like this. When I became involved in the Constitutional Convention, I had my own personal escort that would follow me at my hotel. 2 men would follow me from my hotel, would follow me to the Capitol, would use the worst possible language. And this had what they didn't notice, but this had the effect of totally revolutionizing all these nice Christian ladies who used to stand around me. They would stand there and hear these guys let loose with something that they didn't even allow you to say in the Navy. And they would just be shocked. And it radicalized a lot of these Christian people who were involved in that. Twice I was punched in the course of this. One time, a young woman who worked with me, Melissa Shelby, was pushed down on the ground. This was without any provocation at all. I complained to the police here. The police did nothing. The Boston police took no action at all. The Beacon Hill police didn't either. I finally ended up filing a complaint with the Justice Department in Washington. And they did send observers here who took movies of people doing this stuff to us. But this is the sort of thing that just shocks a lot of us who are involved in this. We can have debates on all sorts of issues, but it seems that when we come to this one, there is sort of a moral upper hand that one group or the other tries to use. And from what I have seen, most of the time, that is not used by the Christian pro-family, pro-marriage people, but we are subjected to harassment. We are called hate mongers, bigots. You know, the 3 words I talked about earlier. The other thing that I want to talk to you a little bit about is this whole argument that people who support traditional marriage are just a bunch of religious fanatics who are trying to impose their view on all society. Well, never mind the fact that if that's true, we've been doing it for centuries, and that this is the first time that it has suddenly become a hate crime. But the fact is that when you hear people talk about separation of church and state, which is one of my favorites, it is the language of bigots that has been adopted by liberal orthodoxy people to attack us. Separation of church and state was a whole mechanism set up to intimidate Roman Catholics. It was used largely by nativists in the earlier part of the 20th century to pick on Roman Catholics, to discourage them from establishing their own schools. There's a group right now that many of you see on television. It's headed by a guy named Barry Lynn, and I think he's a reverend. And he has a group called Americans United for Separation in Church and State. Well, the interesting history of this group is that in 1947, when it was founded, it was called Protestants and Other Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And the first thing they did was Cardinal Cushing and some of the American cardinals of the Catholic Church had gone to Rome, and they were trying to get their passports revoked because they didn't want to let them back in the country. Now, these are the people who coined separation of church and state, really. These are the ones who made it popular. We hear a lot about, well, it's in the Constitution, you know, it's a constitutional principle. Many of you who've looked at the Constitution know that it's not in the Constitution, that it was actually part of a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a group of pastors in Danbury, Connecticut, none of whom ever referred to it again. It was like a throwaway line that Jefferson had put in this. It didn't come up again until, I think it was in the early 40s, Lyndon Johnson got involved in a case where he was tangling with some pastors in Texas, and they pulled it out and used it. But it is the language of bigotry. It is the language of the Ku Klux Klan, and liberals are now co-opting it and using it to try and silence Christians, particularly evangelicals and Roman Catholics. They're using it to try and privatize religion, which is to say that, you know, it's okay for you to believe what you want to believe, but don't talk to us about it. You know, you can believe it in your church and you can act on it in your church, but don't bring it into the public square. Well, that's exactly the situation in China. Many of you are aware of home churches that have operated in China. That's where we're headed. And I know it sounds extreme to say that, but look at some of the arguments that are made about people who they say are religious and trying to impose their views. And it is exactly where we are headed. This was a country that was created for a moral people, for people who had community standards. Don't believe me, believe people like George Washington, who said that some religious views were absolutely essential to governing. That's, to hear the intellectuals and some of the liberal leaders today, that's the opposite. You know, we're not supposed to have religious views. A couple more things about the political landscape here in Massachusetts. I am largely a political consultant. I do political campaigns. I've done House races for the U.S. Congress and a couple Senate races, and I was involved in Ronald Reagan's 1984 campaign. And the campaigns here right now that you're seeing played out in Massachusetts are extremely one-sided and lopsided. The money that is flowing into this state from the National Homosexual Lobby way outweighs anything else that's coming in. HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, spent $6.5 million just on state races, state Senate, state representative races. Now these are races where typically it is a man or a woman running, and their idea of a campaign is, let's get out the Christmas card list and send a mailing, and that's pretty much the campaign. And they typically spend $2,000 or $3,000 on a campaign. They're now having to spend, Democrats and Republicans in the state, $30,000, $40,000. And, you know, liberal reformers think this is good somehow, that we're now having to spend more money on campaigns. Some of the races, Joyce Spiliotis, a Democrat in Peabody, ran in a race where she says $200,000 was spent against her in mailings and things like that. Now, I'm not against people expressing their views and actively participating in the process, but it's strange that so much money is spent and so little is said about the homosexual agenda. If you look at the literature in the Spiliotis race and the literature in the race that's being held right here in Carl Shortino's race against Vinnie Ciampa, there's a real attempt to deceive and disguise. And money is put into literature, and literature is produced by groups which doesn't say anything at all about their agenda. And there's an attempt to sneak something by the voters, which is exactly what happened here. A candidate who is a homosexual activist and an anti-Catholic activist, someone who has disrupted Catholic masses, someone who holds the Catholic Church in great scorn. All of that somehow didn't come up during the campaign, didn't get mentioned. And then all this, and frankly, Mr. Ciampa, I don't think ran a very good campaign. But they snuck this candidate in. There's now a process of stickers that are going on here to try and readdress that. And frankly, I think it looks very good for Mr. Ciampa. I think he is probably going to retain that seat. But there's a common thread of deception in a lot of the political campaigns that are being waged by the Human Rights Campaign and by Mass Equality, the local version of the Human Rights Campaign. So I've sort of skipped around here, and I've tried to fill in things that, along with the many good points that Brian and Dr. Diggs made. I'd be willing, and I know these two gentlemen are willing to answer any questions you might have, and I'm just going to go back over here and sit with them. And Brian, are you going to? Sure. Who's going to do that? Are you going to do that? Okay.
Thank you very much. And as all three speakers mentioned, an added benefit is that they're going to stay here for quite a while and take your questions. Jeannie, you want to help out? So we have a wireless mic. If you want to come around, just raise your hand if you have a question, and Gina will come to you. And if you want to address your question to a specific speaker, just make that clear.
This is really to the room. I think it has to be brought down to the personal. I'm a lecturer at Tufts. I'm an out gay professor, have been for a long time. My name is Jonathan Strong in the English department. I've heard a lot of generalities about people, but let's talk about individuals for a minute. I'm 60 years old. I've been gay since ever I can remember. I don't actually care if it's a gene or a something that occurred over my upbringing. The fact is, it's who I am and what makes me happy about myself. It was a long struggle because, in fact, given people with views that said I was sick or perverted or somehow less than complete, or that even that I wasn't gay, I had a long struggle to get past that. But I did it, and luckily this generation doesn't have as much to go over because there are a lot more of us out there. I'm married legally in Massachusetts to my male partner. I'm an advocate for all human rights, but specifically gay rights here on campus and in the community at large, will continue to be. I would like to know from these people how in any way my existence, what I've done in my life, which has made me happy and many friends, hetero and homo, happy too. I feel myself as a role model to students, as do many of us older gay and lesbian people on campus. We want to be there not just for the gay students, but for the entire community, so that straight students too can see that what they might imagine adult homosexuals are like is not to be put in statistics, but into individual people. I would like to know from you how my existence is so terrifying to you people.
Do you want to start addressing that, Dr. Diggs?
I would be happy to answer that question. First of all, there's a very important lesson that all of us should take into mind and into account. Anytime these discussions are had on difficult issues, someone always tries to redefine it to the personal. I'm talking about public health, and public health affects people, but it requires national policy. And the question is frequently raised, how does what I do whatever? First of all, there's no terror on my part. There's extreme sadness. There's sadness because I've seen what homosexual activism does to the public health. I've told you already about people that have died, and we're talking about people in the thousands, perhaps over time it will be in the millions. But that's answer number one.
One homosexual activism. I'm a homosexual activist. I haven't caused people to die.
You have, sir. The homosexual activist movement has. Again, what you try to do is redefine this to what you personally have done, and this is really not the discussion. And the reason that this is a common tactic, and the common tactic has the purpose of making it personal and saying, oh, well, I know this nice guy who participates in homosexuality down the street, and therefore it has no public health implications. But I assure you it does. And I'm not sure what field you are in, but I know that you're well trained enough to know that it does also. But I want to show you a chart. Can you hold this 1 second?
It does not. I would just say that for the record.
So noted. But here we go. This is a chart which came out of a journal called the International Journal of Epidemiology, and I'll explain it to you. What this does is it looks at the lifespan, the life expectancy of somebody who's 20 years old. And you'll see 4 lines going across here. This is 100% of people still alive at age 20. You go over to, say, age 65, and naturally, between 20 and 65, people die. And as they die, you'll see something very interesting. The top line represents people who are self-described heterosexual. And you'll see that by age 65, something in the order of 80% of them continue to live. If the homosexual population was, as I described it, something less than 3%.